right, we have a new IBI community coming. It's actually out there right now, and you're invited and requested to register, log in, community.ibi.com. Uh, there are forums out there. You can ask questions in the Q&A section, and Walter and I and a number of other people constantly look at these things. So if there's something we can help you with, we'll be very happy to do so. We are we are putting together the knowledge base that we used to have in the older systems and putting all of our resources into one place. So this will be very helpful for you. Look to see that it's out there now, and it will be continue to be expanded. And as we since this is basically peer, you're going to be able to learn from the other folks who are using the products, including Focus, WebFOCUS, Data Migrator, and all, Omni, and all of our products. So please go over, register, join, and participate. Okay, let's move on. On from there to where I'm going to start today. And we'll be here. I'm actually going to talk about three things today. Three about by sorting. I've got a piece of the things you can use immediately, and also some of an administrator's view of what focus looks like on a system. So we can start to provide some training for the sysadmins. It's relatively quick. It goes through, well, you'll see what it goes through. It goes through what focus looks like to the system. So let's start off with by. By, we all know what by is. By is our sort, right? It's our vertical sort. And because it's our vertical sort, let's go here. We're actually going to talk about two things about by. By actually does a lot of things. It's something very simple. Most of the requests that we have some kind of sort in it. I'm splitting this out. I'm going to talk about by this week. At some other point in the future, I'll talk about across. I may actually extend a little bit on the by because by has got an enormous amount of functionality built into it. And the more you know about it, the more facile you'll become with it, the easier it will become to use. I mean, it does basically two things. It sorts and it groups. Now, there are other things that it does that I'm not going to get in today. There are things that are actually very powerful that it does. But for right now, let's talk about what it does in terms of sorting. The sorting that it's doing basically in its display is going to be controlled entirely by the verb that you're using in the request, right? Now we have four major verbs that we use. This may be a little bit of a review for you guys. Print is the basic one, and print basically gives us every record. Each individual value for the field is displayed. If I use print star, I'm going to see every field, every value of every field displayed. You'll see in the request here, I have something called print seg dot. Seg dot basically is a prefix operator that allows me to specify a segment in the master file. So I don't have to specify every field in that segment. I can say seg dot and any field in that segment, and it will print it will use all of the fields in that segment. So that's actually very useful. It simplifies things, especially when you're dealing with very large files. If you have relational tables that have thousands of fields, but they are segmented out, you can actually get to them and display them very easily, or manipulate them very easily. Now, in this particular case, when I display it, my by field here is my department, and I've got all the rest of my fields, and you can see I've got one data value for every line except for my sort field. And this actually is default behavior. It's been around for a long time. Sort fields do not display the values. Do not display the values if they're repeated, right? So you see one value for MIS, one line, and the assumption is that any line underneath that going to the next sort break will be blank. Doesn't mean it's not that value. In fact, if you were to hold this into a hold file, you would see the MIS in every one of those lines. It would not show up like this, which is a good thing. Now, this makes it easier to read. However, it does create problems when you go to something like Excel. Now, there's another verb that we have, and it's not, you don't see it a lot in the WebFOCUS world. It's called list. And list basically gives you the same thing as print, but it also gives you a sequence number based upon the major sort in the request. The major sort being the outermost sort, the highest level sort. If I've got a simple here, I'm going to list seg.employee by department. Again, same thing. In this case, I end up with a new column. I get this for free. It's a list, and you can see that the list is numbered, and it's numbered based upon the order in which we read it, and it's numbered for it changes. It goes back to 1 at the point that the major sort, in this case department, changes. Now, the display basically can be controlled. Obviously, display is controlled with the verb that's being used. The list here also has is an interesting thing. If I have more than one by field, let's take a look at what happens. Now, I've added a little note in here about count width, and just to let you know, when you're using either list or count, we have a limit on the size of that field. By default, it's an I5, an integer 5. So it can only go up to 9,999 instances. So if you go above that, you're going to end up with stars, asterisks. This is the normal count width. If you want to move it up to 9 digits, you can using set count width equals on. You can even set count width equal to a specific number. If you know the number that you want, you can do that. Now, bear in mind, with the newer versions of 64-bit systems, our integers go a lot larger than they used to. So you do have the ability to set that using set count width, right? So if you see something show up as stars, you're merrily counting along 9999, 4 nines, and all of a sudden you pop into 5 stars. You've overflowed the count area. That's all you've done. There's nothing wrong with it. It's actually, the number is actually there. We just don't have the ability to display it. So count width is a way to solve that. Now, if I actually have multiple sorts, notice that my list is moved, right? My list is moved inside of all of the sorts, but it's still counting only at the highest level, all right? And that's the way list works. It counts at the major sort breaks. Now, the other verbs that we have, 2 other verbs, actually 2 types. One, sum, write, and add all mean exactly the same thing. We show on these cases exactly 1 line per sort value. If there are numeric values, those values are in a given field are added together. If the field is alpha, we will show the first or the last value depending upon your set sum prefix value. And the set sum prefix is defaulted to last. So typically we would take the last value, the last alpha value, and show that in a sum. You can set it to first if you want. It's entirely up to you. Let's take a look at what happens when we do this with our department. We've got 2. We're getting exactly 1 line per department, and we're adding the numbers. Now, the numbers here are the current salary and the ed hours. We're not adding the emp IDs or the last name, first name, hire date. These are not considered numbered, consequently not added. It's a good thing. Count gives me 1 value per 1 line per sort value, right? We count the number of occurrences of the field. Right? And if I count the current job code, I find that I've got can see this does it very nicely. It just counts I'm counting the last name by current job code. Now, when I do this, the one thing to remember with this is that I'm counting if I do something bigger than that, and in this case, I'm going to count the entire segment. Let's take a look at what happens then. Okay. Notice that every number on every line on the line is the same. It's because when I'm counting, I'm actually counting instances, all right, not necessarily specifically values. If I count the A1s, the current job codes, then I'm counting it's an apparent kind of a thing. I will get the same number whether I count the number of instances or the number of current job codes, right? It's the same thing. All those numbers are going to be the same because I'm actually counting the instances, right? Just a real summary display sorting. When I'm working with sorts, my display on my sort's going to be controlled by the verb I'm working with, print, list, sum, or count, right? Now, when I work with by, I'm actually what my display shows me. It shows me data values vertically in rows. Okay, and we always position these in the leftmost column. Now, how do I get? What if I don't want this in the leftmost column? There are a number of things you can do. One of the things you can do is to reposition these by sort fields by using a no print and the field and the verb object list. All right. And that's exactly what I've done with this particular request here. I've no printed the actual sort field, and the sort field in this case happens to be, the sort field happens to be by last name. So I want it sorted by last name, but I want to see in my leftmost column, I want to see first name. And that's exactly what I do. You see that my last name is my sort column, but I'm actually showing that in the middle. Now, this is an easy way to do this with no print, and you can do this by hiding these fields in the GUI tools. Very straightforward. You can also manipulate this using style. You can actually move the columns around in a styled report using the style syntax. Now, one of the other things that we showed is that sometimes sometimes the data values don't show. All right, how do I get those guys to show? The ones in my sort fields, if I have multiples, it doesn't show up every time. Well, there is a way to do that. I can set by display. I can use the by display set command. That command basically has 5 settings. Off, which is the default, which is why you don't see anything there. On, on and by, which are exactly the same thing. It will show the value on a by sort. Across, which will show you only the column value, only for an across, or all, which shows you both bys and acrosses and fills those in. Right. Notice that you can do this both as a set command, which is done outside of a specific table request, and from within the table request itself. Normally, when you're working with WebFOCUS, this is what you'll tend to see is the on-table set, especially if you're going to something like Excel. You definitely in Excel, you want those data values populated. You do not want to be missing data values from a sort field because they will not be manipulatable. All right, we went through those. By display shows. All right, let's do a quick test on by display. Here's by display off, by display on. Difficult, huh? But important to remember, this is, if you're looking for it and you don't see it, this is the by display is a set command to handle this. Right. Now, you in the product have 128 sort fields. That means you have, and these are the combination of by fields and across fields. So you get both. We used to have a limit of, and I'm going to say 16 or 32 bys and 5 acrosses. We were always limited acrosses. We changed the way that we actually handled acrosses once we built our internal sort API, which now allows us to do a lot of additional stuff. It allowed us to increase the number of sort fields that we have, and it gives us the ability to mix and match these. So if you want 128 across fields, you can have that. If you want 128 by fields, you can have that, or any combination there in between. Now, there's another thing that we've always had to worry about, and that is the actual size of the buffer that we work with when dealing with a record, and that has been increased. Actually, the limit on that has been, so the old limits that we used to have with respect to logical record length of the internal matrix, those are all gone. So that's that. Let's talk about the sequencing. When we sort, we normally expect to see, we default to low to high, okay? Which in code, if you're coding with FOCUS, that would be by lowest. Now, you don't need to say by lowest because we assume that if you don't have anything there, it's a by lowest. Now, we also have, you can sort high to low if you use the phrase by highest. And these work not only with by fields, but also with by totals. Now, by totals are sorts that we're allowed to do after we collected all our data and put all of our data into what we call the internal matrix. When we start to bring the data out of the internal matrix, which is at the point when we begin to do the formatting, at that point we can resort. When we do it at that point, it's called by total, not by, and you can do by total lowest and by total highest at the same time. Right. Now, here's a case where we're going to take a look at the by lowest department, by highest, highest last name. You can mix and match the sort sequences, all right? But remember, they are nested. Sorts are nested within each other, within one above it. You'll see that we have a low to high in department, and we have a high to low in last name. And you can mix and match these as much as you want. Now, it's also possible for you to create your own sort sequence. You're not limited to use just these. If you have a sort sequence that you specifically want to use, then you can actually create that and use that. The question is, what values do you need to include? And what sequence do you want them to be sorted in? And both of these questions are important because the way that we implement these user sorts, these user-specified sorts, is they are both a sort and they are a selection. So that first one is really, really important. What values do you need to include? Now, where would you see something like this? Probably the most prevalent one that I've seen is when you're looking for specific sequences that don't work either numerically or alphabetically, especially alphabetically. For instance, days of the week: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. All right, that sequence alphabetically doesn't work. All right, that is a sequence that's not alphabetical either by highest or by lowest. So if you want to use that, you can use that, but you're going to have to specify your own sort sequence to do it, and you can do that. We have the syntax that will actually let you do that. And the syntax is very straightforward. You do this, there's a whole section inside of the GUI tools that allows you to actually specify what values you want and the sequence that you want them in, and that's implementing this specific kind of sort. It's by sort field. You can put an as name on that sort field, and it's a fairly important thing to do. And then you're going to use the keyword rows value over another value. Notice here also now that you can actually rename the data value to something else. And we'll take a look at that with the as text one. That allows me to take the data value and change that to something else because I may not want to actually display the data value. I may want to obfuscate that in some way. Well, I can do that very easily. So let's take a look at a simple request. In this particular case, I'm going to sort McCoy over Cross over Banning. All right, it's a non-alphabetical over Johnson. Now, if you know employee, let's take a look and let's run this. you'll see that, okay, I've got McCroy, Cross, Banning, and then Johnson. Well, there's no Johnson in the database. Okay. The important thing when you're working with this kind of a sort, the fact that you specify this in in the rows is going to automatically include this in the display, whether there's data there or not. So if, for instance, you're using Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or the number of months, and there's no, for instance, sales on a specific day, and there's no sales on that specific day, you don't have to worry about that data value disappearing from the sort value disappearing from the report. It will be there. It will come up showing either no data. In this particular case, we're showing no data, or it'll come up as a 0. Depends on how you code that. But you do end up with both a selection and a sort when you do this. Now, let me back up. Take a look at the column title for first name or for last name. It's not there. It's gone. Well, this is an old thing that's been there for a long time. To eliminate that problem, all you have to do is put an as some name on that by field, and when you run it, you all of a sudden end up with that last name. All right, handy. All right, and that actually is that's a good thing to remember, because unless you do that, that's going to be blank. Now, let's take a look at what happens if I start to play with those data value names and changing those. In this case, I'm going to change each of those names into some subject number, sub 1, sub 2, sub 3, sub 4, because I don't necessarily want to see their names, all right, at least their last names. I want to hide those. All right, I can do that very easily. And as you see, this works like a little bit like a champ. I have the ability now to hide those data values, which can be very useful, right? Very useful. It selects the data, and just at the time we go to rewrite it, or write the data out, we automatically just plug in these as's. Very handy. Now, the sort sequence, a couple things to remember. All right, when you're playing with sort sequence and with by, the sort value is not any sort value that is not included, is not specified in the rows, is not included in the report. It's very simple. There's an absolute, that's the selection. This is an implicit selection test. It's an if test, so if you don't mention it there, it's not going to show up. The sort field value, with or without values, is included in the output. In other words, the column is going to be there. All right, whether it's got data or not, because you've asked for it, means that it's going to show up. If you're working with data that has spaces, please put quotes around the data in the specification. Use quotes around the data values that you want plugged in there, so that we know. Use the as title name to add a title to the sort column, because unfortunately, when this was originally built, that disappeared, and for whatever reason, it is now back with an as name, so that you can have the ability to name it. You can name it anything you want. Now, you can only use this rows over once in a report, right? Because of the complexity, it's in effect another sort. It's only allowed once. All right. What else can we do? We also have the ability with by, which is a sort, to rank them. All right. And with ranking, and the phrase is ranked by, I'm going to assign a numerical ranking to each sort. All right. Not sure what that is. You can see the sequence here, the ranked as some column name, by highest or lowest sort field N as some column title. All right, that's what we've got. All right, now a couple of things. Duplicate rank values are possible. All right, if I have the same data value, it's going to get the same ranking, right? And we'll talk about how you handle that in a second. The default column title is rank. All right, if you don't like that, you can use the as rank column name to name it whatever you want. The column format is an I7. All right. In other words, you've got 7 digits to put the counter in here. Right. This works with both buys and buy totals. Right. So let's take a look. I'm going to rank. I'm going to print last name ranked by order, uh, ranked as order by current salary. All right. Now in this case, uh, we've got I've got 12 of them, and this is I think is this everybody? Yes, this is everybody. You'll notice that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I've got a space. Well, that's because the current salary for both Jones and McCoy is exactly the same. So the ranking is the same. All right. Now, notice what happens next. In this particular case, McCoy has no number, but Romans, which is the next one, picks up right where the ranking left off. Right. Now, this is called a dense ranking. Now, I also, and we'll talk about that in 1 second. Let's take a look at what happens. What are some of the other things we can do? We can also limit the number of values that we go after. I can take my lowest 5 current salaries. Right? I want to take the lowest 5. I can get the lowest 2, lowest 1, highest 5, so that you have this ability to limit using the order. You can actually limit what you're getting. Right? So you have another bit of a selection there. All right. When I set rank is a set command that's available to you. Basically, it allows you to set uh, the way that we number the duplicate value, the way that we handle the duplicate values when you're ranking, right? With dense, the duplicates are not counted. So that if I have a series of several values that are the same, whatever the ranking is for those, it's assumed to be the same rank for all of them, and the next one will get the next possible number. In this particular case, let's take a look at emp data, and I'm going to rank them by the highest 12 salaries, and let's take a look at what we end up with. You'll notice that I have way more than 12 people. That's because I'm taking the highest 12 salaries. I've got 12 salaries, but that's actually more people than 12, isn't it? So when I'm using dense, there's a good chance I'll actually end up with more than I actually asking for. I'm asking for the highest 12 salaries. And in this case, for instance, I've got 6 at 62.5. So and notice that after 62.5, the dense means that my next one after that, Gottlieb, is going to be number 7, right? That's fairly straightforward. When I set it to sparse, which is the opposite, the duplicates are added into the count. So this is going to change the output that I actually get. Let's take a look and see exactly how. Now I've got the by highest 12, but notice that the duplicates are counted in that 12. So I don't have that long list that I had before. My 12th one, Gottlieb, instead of being 7, is now 12. And I've only asked for 12. Consequently, that's all I'm seeing. All right. So there's a big difference between the set rank equals dense and the set rank equals sparse. Notice that in this slide, I even screwed up here. This should be sparse. All right. I will fix that. All right. But that should be sparse. All right. Let's talk about grouping. The other thing that buy does is group. And we have 2 things. There are basically 2 things that we want to do with. We want to look for groups of equal range, same size groups, and I have 2 ways of doing that. I can use the in groups of or the in ranges of. Now, the syntax is virtually the same. It's by sort field and then in groups of or in ranges of n a top limit, a top with a limit. In other words, I can say in groups of 5, I want to take a look at salary in groups of 5,000, in groups of 5,000, which would be my n. That's going to be the size of my group. Top, and I can set a limit, a high end if I want to. I don't have to, but I can set a high end if I want to. It's the same thing with in ranges of. It looks almost exactly the same, and it is almost exactly the same. There's only a slight difference. Now, in this case, the sort field has to be numeric, right? So this is not going to work with alphas, right? So let's take a look at it in groups of very quickly. And groups of basically is going to show me the current salary, and then it's going to give me the last names. Notice this is the endpoint of my group. This is from 5,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 15,000. Notice that these are equal size groups, right? And I'm just grouping them, okay? These are the low end. Now, if I use ranges, what's the difference? Well, the difference with ranges is the ranges specifies the full range if you need to do that. All right. And it'll show you it's exactly the same as in groups of, but it's actually showing the full range in the display on the current salary. So you see it's not just 5,000, it's 5,000 to 9,999.99. And that's based on the format of the field that you're currently working with. If you don't like the numbers, if you don't want to get, if you want to get rid of the dots, .00, you can do that with the format, right? Now, those are equal ranges. What if you want unequal ranges, right? And you can do this very easily. There's a little bit of a cheat, but not really. Instead of using the word by, you use the word for. Now, for and by are actually synonymous. For actually opens up another part of the product, the financial modeling language, which gives us a great deal more flexibility in the way that we specify things like sorts. And you can see right here, that's exactly what it's doing. And this is the functionality that you get. I'm going to print last name for current salary. That's my by field. And then I'm going to specify the ranges, 9,000 to 13,000. And I want to put it over 13,1 to 19,7, over 19,8 to 35,000. Now, those are unequal groups, right? And in order to get that, this is the way that we deal with it. And it's actually very straightforward. And it will actually create exactly what I'm looking for. Now, notice that currently, and there's a way to get the display to change, but right now I'm showing the low end of the group, and that's exactly what I would want to do. This is a group, right? And you can rename those in the for syntax, but this actually gets into the financial modeling language, and we will be talking about financial modeling language later this spring. Walter's going to do a presentation on it. All right, I think that's probably enough for today on the wonderful world of buy. There's some additional stuff that I will eventually bring to you in terms of buy, what you can do with buy. Buy is one of those things that you can do a lot with, right? When I say buy, what I'm doing is I'm creating a breakpoint in my data, an artificial breakpoint. And not only can I change the sequence and mess around with the way I display it, I can add things in at those particular points. And we'll talk about that in the presentation. We'll talk about the kinds of things that you can add in at the point that those breaks occur. All right. And you probably see them anytime you have anything you can add on to a by phrase or a cross phrase, basically those kinds of things. And some of those are subtotals, some of them where you're actually creating summaries, data summaries. You can also create formatting changes. There's a lot of things you can do with that. And we'll talk about that as a second not the next time, but a little bit later this spring. All right. Any questions about that? All right, let me go back over and see if I've got any questions floating around. Do I have any questions? Let me see if I can see where I've got Q&A. No quiz. Okay, that's good. And I don't see I don't see anything in chat. All right. Okay. All right. Now, let's move right along. The next thing we'll take a look at is, where is it? It's hiding. It's hiding. Here we go. Is going to be this one. And let's see, let's go here and go. There we go. More things you can use tomorrow, today, last week, or whenever. Um, Over the course of many years, we've been able to capture a lot of information about little things, about things that are kind of important for the language. And they tend to hide. So we've across these period of time put together a large number of presentations with lots of these things. And I'm going back and grabbing some of these just so that we can pull them back and review them again, as since it's now new. Never is A lot of this stuff is still very useful. It's language based for the most part. And I know in the WebFOCUS world, you can get, depending upon if you're working in App Studio, you definitely have access to language. And in the designer, you have less language, less access to the language, but it's not impossible. So let's take a look at some more things that you can use. I want to talk a little bit about some dialog manager, about some functions, about our good old friend missing data, app commands, and troubleshooting. So let's dive right in. Again, if you have any questions, please put them uh, in the either Q&A or chat, either one. All right, Dialog Manager. Dialog Manager is our procedure language inside of the FOCUS and WebFOCUS product. It is a proc language. It's exactly what it is. It's what it allows you to do. Whatever dialog manager is, it executes immediately. It doesn't stack. It doesn't stack like the table commands that you build within the tools that you generate requests from, or the graph commands that you use. Those are all stacked commands, right? We have to build a stack of uh, characteristics that we want, and then we send it to the engine to run. Dialog Manager is a single command and it runs immediately, right? So it's very useful procedurally. And there's some interesting things. There's a lot that you can do with it. You can actually use Dialog Manager as a very important building tool. One of the things that we have in there is a little function called as is, right? Now, in Dialog Manager, for the most part, all right, a blank, a zero, a quote, zero quote, quote 0000 quote are all the same. They're equivalent. And if you do an equation, if you equate them, that's what you're going to find out. That that statement, blank equals zero equals quote, zero equals quote, 0000 quote, is true. Now, bear in mind, when you're dealing with dialog manager variables, there is no format. Dialog manager variables are a string of characters, all right? They may have numeric characteristics, but they are a string of characters, right? Consequently, it makes it very easy to do something like that, but that may not be what you want. You may actually want to test the actual true value. You may want to differentiate between a blank and a zero, right? If you do, there's a way to do that. If you can see here, I've got a dash set ampervar equals space and a dash set ampervar equals zero, right? And those are the default values basically when we don't have something, right? If you don't have no data set, that's what you're going to get. If you push this into a numeric field, it'll be zero. If you push it into an alpha field, it'll be a space. All right. So ampervar 1 equals ampervar 2 is generally true for the most part. However, if I use as is on each one of these ampere variables, and I say as is ampervar 1 is equal to as is ampervar 2, that's not true. That's false, right? And I can then go and I can test each of these individually to determine whether they're equal to the other ones. And they're all false. So the way to treat an ampere variable as its actual value, and this is really important with zeros and spaces and nulls, is to use the as is function. All right. You just plug it in front of it. All right. Now, let's talk about some system variables. One of the things that we give you within the dialog manager world is the ability to communicate with the operating system you're running on top of, right? Very handy. Amper OS type. No, this is global. Amper OS type tells me what kind of an operating system I'm running on top of. All right. Now, a long time ago, when I first started, you were running on a specific operating system. You didn't have any option, right? You knew immediately. If you were running on Windows, you were running on Windows. If you were running on Unix, you were running on Unix. If you were running on MPE in the old HP operating system, you knew it was MPE. It wasn't as if, well, yeah, it might be Unix, but I don't really know. Now, okay, now this is a little bit more important because now we don't know in some cases where we actually are. All right, for the simple reason that we have a lot more work being shared across platforms. So you have the ability to ask, who am I? Where am I? Right? App root. If you're working in the WebFOCUS world, and this is more prevalent in WebFOCUS than in Focus, we have applications. Everything is built around the concept of applications. We build application folders. We put stuff in the application folders. These folders are all based on a root, all right? And that's our app root. That's the top of the folder directory. That can be returned. You can get that in the amper root amper variable. All you have to do is reference it. Now, once you get it, you can test it. You can pull it apart and grab various pieces. So you have the ability to get a hold of that if you need it. Now, what FOCUS exec am I currently running? Do you know? If you don't know, you can get it from amper FOCUS exec name because we store that. All right. So you now know who I am when I'm running. And this is something that if you need to, you can test and you can pass along. So these kinds of variables, and there are other system variables. If you're interested in them, if you're building stuff that does require this sort of stuff, take a look in the dialog manager. Documentation is generally in developing applications, and that there's a good deal of information in the variables chapter. Another thing you can do with variables. Variables can be subscripted. What does that mean? I can have a number of the same amper variable. I can have any number that I want. In other words, if I have amper test, but I actually need to have 10 amper tests or 20 amper tests because I've got that many different, for instance, I'm grading tests and I need to put my grades into amper test for each of those. I can create amper test 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way out to amper test 20 very easily using a repeat command and the subscripted variable. The subscripted variable here is this amper test dot amper n. All right. Amper test, in this case, in the code right here, dash set amper test amper I dot amper I equals this variable. This is a variable quote amper I. The variable amper test dot amper I is going to resolve, because I have to resolve all my variables before anything else happens, right? That's going to resolve to amper test some number. And in this particular case, it's a number from 1 to 10. So the first time through, that's going to be amper test 1. The second time, it'll be amper test 2. This will go all the way to amper test 10, and then it'll stop because of the way the dash repeat loop works. The dash repeat loop will end. It'll jump past var loop once it has gotten to 10. 10, and the next time it comes back, it'll say, I'm already past 10, therefore I'm going to go to var loop and continue on from there. And you see here, I've got a question mark ampersand, which actually shows me what I got. And this is what I end up with. Amper test 1. Right. So you have the ability to use this subscripting on amper variables when you have multiple instances of, for instance, the same value. Right. You're reading data with dash read file. All right. And you're going to read, you've only got 3 or 4 records, but you need to pull it all out at one time and put it in something that you can manipulate. You may actually need to be able to compare them. All right. I've got three records. They're 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 all created one after another, and I need to see if the last one is greater than the first one. All right, very easy. You simply create the amper test, put it into a subscripted amper test, 1, 2, and 3, and then check the see whether amper test 3 is larger than amper test 1. All right, that's pretty straightforward. That's the idea here. This gives you a lot more capability of doing calculation and some interesting kinds of comparisons when you need to using Dialog Manager in that proc language. All right, let's move on to some functions. Functions can be used pretty much everywhere, Focus and in WebFocus. A couple of favorites, strip, strrep, dblookup, and one of my real favorites is putDDrec. All right, let's talk about strip. Strip basically removes a character from a string. All right. Now, since strip is an older version, we have newer versions of some of these functions that do not require that you use the A10. That last parameter that we have to pass in has always historically been the output for where we're putting it. And it could either be the name of the field or it could be the size, the format of the field. In this case, it's the format. But either way, strip basically is going to allow you to remove. That's what you're doing. You're knocking out the dashes in the telephone numbers because it's only going to create problems. Or that's what you think. So you have a very easy way to do that. strrep basically replaces a string with another string. It's not a character. It's not basically working with a single character. It's working with a string. So you can replace a string with another string. And that can make life very easy. This is, if you're in the world of doing editing, one of the things you do is to find and replace. And effectively what this strrep does is allow you to do exactly that programmatically. And it's fairly straightforward. dblookup. dblookup and putDDrec both allow us to do something we typically do not do in Dialog Manager or in the product. It allows us to play with a second file, right, at the same time. I'm going to look up a value in another data source while I'm working with my current data source, dblookup, right? No join is required. It's not a replacement for join, all right? If this is something that you should really be doing with join, then you should do it with join. dblookup is going to be, if you're dealing with very large lookups, then don't use dblookup. Use join. All right, it's going to be a whole lot faster. Preferably do the join on the field that you're going to be doing the lookup on, so that you can basically make use of the indexing. Right. dblookup basically has a fairly straightforward. You can actually bring back multiple fields. You can look up more than one field at a time, which is very useful. In this case, I'm going to go take a look at finance, and I'm going to I want to take a look at the region in the region field, and I'm going to bring back and put it in the sales manager, right? So this is a fairly straightforward thing to do, all right? Manager, very useful. All right, putDDrec. When I open a file in Focus or WebFocus, that pretty much becomes it becomes a lifeblood. Now, I can open multiple files at the same time. That's absolutely correct. I can set it up so that I have a join or I have a combine if I'm playing with modify. I can open up a large number of files and use them as much as I want. Generally, you do that in a join, or you do that in a modify, in a combined statement. You do it before you actually start the processing, right? So that when I start my table request, I already know that I'm talking to a structure which has multiple files. Okay, that's good. putDDrec is actually designed to allow you to open up and use another file in the middle of a table request itself, right? And this is kind of interesting because this allows me to write output to another file while I'm doing output in my focus session or my WebFocus session. I'm going to output in my WebFocus session to Excel. At the same time I'm doing that, I can use putDDREC to output to a log file or output to, basically it's going to have to go out to some sort of a flat file. And it's very easy to do. It involves basically file defing an output file, which is what we do. We see the app file write out disk to write out.txt. I'm going to use, in order to use putDDREC, you have to use it in a compute. And typically, you do not want to see the output of putDDREC because you're writing to another file. The output of putDDREC is going to be a return code that says, yes, I wrote it, or no, I didn't write it. And that's all. It's going to be a 0 or a 1. So what you want to do is just basically no print that field, because unless you really wanted to see it, you can see it if you want, and you'll see a list of zeros and ones. Or you can just basically suppress it so that the file just gets created, the output. In this particular case, I'm going to take the field called basically into the writeout.txt file, which is has a name that's 8 characters long. I'm going to write a field called text, which I have already defined in a compute or define, or it's in the data file, and it's 52 characters long. And I'm going to return a return code of 1. It's an I1. So that'll either come back 1 or non-zero, 0 or non-zero. In this case, I'm going to suppress that. Now, what happens when I run that? Well, this is what happens. In this particular case, I wrote to the screen, but I also wrote out to a text file the data that we just saw, right? And I could write it in any form I want. I could select here if I wanted to. The conditions under which you write and what you write are entirely up to you, all right? So that you have the ability to actually do some, as you're processing, you could literally create, for instance, if you're grabbing data with respect to invoices, or you're processing things that need to be dealt with in an immediate fashion, you can literally build a list of things that need to be dealt with because, for instance, the date is over a certain, the age is over a certain date, the amount is over a certain amount. You can create that list using the computes here and output it to a putDDREC, which could then be used to feed anything else. That file could then turn right around. You could pick that file up immediately and process it using something else. You could literally pick that file up and have another table request that's going to generate a letter or an email that's going to go out to somebody saying, look, you need to pay this bill because it's overdue. And you have the details from, you carry the details into that letter using the putDDREC data. So you have a very easy way of moving data. This is a very powerful little tool. And it's the kind of thing that's like, okay, now that you know that you've got it, you can play with it. You'll find uses for it, I'm sure. Now, both functions have to be executed as part of a calculation. All right. They can be conditionally executed if they're in else logic. And you actually get the chance to decide exactly when this is being done. Now, okay, concatenation question. Okay, I see a question here. Let me finish this up and then we'll talk about that. If the sales in this, I've got 2 cases here. I condition this so that I can control what's being done and when. All right, so that was the idea behind this. It's basically, this gives you the control. All right, now let's go to the questions. 2 questions here. Subscripted variable array, limited. It's a limited array. You've only got one. It's not as if you have multiple values there. You can't have. Yeah. It's like an array. It's more like a vector. All right. I.e. double quote, double quote. When is this third tick used? Okay, question here. I've come across a concatenation question, i.e. double quote, space, double quote, type, double quote, and then triple quote. All right. Um, all right. The only time you would probably pick up a third tick is when you're actually sitting. There's another tick someplace else. If you are within, I mean, you're going to have to keep, you have to keep opens and closes on quotes and parentheses and all that stuff the same. So my guess is there's a third tick laying around somewhere out there that also has to be closed. And if you didn't close it, it's going to throw an error and say, hey, I'm not complete. All right. Is this only for focus DBs, DB lookup? No, it's not for just focus, for any DB. All right. You can go to anything that we can read. All right. You're not limited to focus. You can use Oracle, you can use DB2, whatever. It's not restricted. All right. Let's move on to missing data. What is it? Missing data is data that it's either blank, it's missing data values or nulls, or it's structural, what I'll call missing segments. And let's take a look at the way we handle these in calculations, in whole files, and on report output. So here we go. Here's an example. I've got profit equals sales minus costs, and here's my data. All right. HR basically has no sales. All right. So when I do this calculation, I end up with minus 90 for a profit. Now, the West legitimately had no sales, so their costs were 90. So they literally were really realistically in a hole. Is sales and HR missing, treated like a zero in the calculation? Is this right? No, it's not right. All right. We can make things missing. And this is one of those cases where that should be missing. How do we make it missing? We turn missing on. All right. How do we turn missing on? When we create the field, we basically indicate that this field can be missable. All right. And when we generally, this can be done in a define, it can be done in a focus in a master file. You can indicate missing equals on. If you notice, you'll automatically generate these when you're using create synonym, whether it's you'll find the missing is usually a normal thing. It's either going to be on or it's going to be off, right? In some cases, missing is not allowed. If you're dealing with something like a key or an index, missing is not going to be allowed. Missing is going to be off. You're not going to be allowed to have that. All right. You don't want a missing value in most cases. Now, in some cases, you can either have some components be missing or all components. Okay, if you need all values, then that's what we call needs all. You could also have something called needs some. Now, needs some basically is an indication that not every value that I'm working with needs to be missing. If I'm working with a calculation and I have two fields that could be missable, and one of them is missable, and both of them are missable, one is missable and the other has a value. If I have needs some, then I can actually continue. All right. If I say needs all, that means that all values that are potentially missable need to have a value. Otherwise, it's missing. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a look at the missing characteristics of the data I'm working with and determining whether I should even have a value there at all, right? Take a look at the sales minus costs. We've now set this to missing on, so profit is missing. Why? Because it shouldn't. We've determined since it's missing something, it's a need, and as a matter of fact, needs all. It needs a value and it doesn't have it. Therefore, I can't do the calculation. I automatically don't do the calculation. I just assign it to missing, and that's what's happened here. Very useful, right? Now, nulls. Nulls can move to whole files in some cases, all right? And if I create a report doing this, let's take a look at what happens. I've got a by country and a cross body type. Now, as soon as I use a cross and I hold this, I've got fields in here or data values in here, pairs, that are structurally missing, but they're not it's not that the data file was missing. All right. There was no convertible value body type for France. Didn't exist. Didn't exist. It's not that it had zero values. Didn't exist. And when I put this into a hold file, I have to be able to determine how to deal with that. All right. And I can do that. Now, normally when I'm building a hold file, this is going to actually create, as you can see, a value. I've got fields that allow me to specify which of these fields are which, because otherwise they all be exactly the same, right? And we do that, we will automatically take the sort field and append that to the data value so that we can see what it is. Hold miss enables creating missing data to be held as missing, right? Default is off, all right? So if you want to use it, you have to turn it on, all right? This is when I set hold miss on and I create this, my hold file, you'll notice that all of a sudden, with this across especially, all of these are potentially missable. So hold miss is going to be on. Right. So I'm going to pass that in, which is useful because then when I go to read it, I will treat it correctly. No data allows me to specify the characters that are going to be used when I represent missing values. Right. It's a character string. The default is dot. You can set it to space. You can set it to anything you want. Right. No data is control characters that are held for missing alpha value, held for missing alpha values. This is no data for whole files for alpha values, right? And again, it's a character string, right? If set, so the default is a dot. If it's set, numeric missing values hold as blank if it's an alpha, right? Notice that. Normally, numeric values that are missing are 0. All right, that's the default. So you can set that to something else if you want. You can set it to no data equals dot, and we will treat it that way so that we know that it's not calculated. It's not calculated. I can also send it to something that's a little bit more meaningful, like n/a. Not applicable. Really very useful. And I can, when I do my HNO data, if I set HNO data, take a look at my whole file, basically ends up with dots here. If I set HNO data equal to NA, my whole file all of a sudden has my NA in it, and I don't have to worry about it. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, right? All right. Any questions about my friend missing data, which has been the bane of my existence? Let's take a look at app commands. App commands are designed to work with the applications. In the WebFOCUS world and the Focus world has also got apps. You can do all kinds of things with this. You can manipulate you can control the files. You can manipulate the path, interrogate the path. You can look inside the folders. These are operating system agnostic commands. They work the same way everywhere, even though they're different. App hold, a specific app name will actually show me. We'll go out, get a list of all the files and the MFDs that go there, that are in there. If I do an app hold meta, I can actually, directs the hold file to a specific app directory. App hold and app hold meta allow me to tell the hold mechanism where to put stuff. All right. So app hold FF work is going to put all the hold files and the metadata into FF work. Right. It doesn't have to be the app directory that you're currently in. All right. It doesn't have to be. App hold meta will do the same thing, but only for the metadata. All right. The data itself is going to go to wherever you've got it currently directed. And that could be someplace else. It could be another application. It could be local, or it could be temp. Right. But you have the ability to control both the data and the metadata individually with the app hold command. File defs. File defs tell us where things are, and we use this in order to specify which files we want to use, and also how to find it. Now, file def and dynam. Dynam is a mainframe command, same thing. Does exactly the same thing. File def has been modified so that it can now be used on the mainframe, inside of Focus and WebFocus. Means the same thing. What we're doing is we're pointing at a file. We're associating a DD name, old name, to a specific file a dataset name, or a specific location within an application. Okay, works on all of our platforms. It can also be used in the master files in the dataset. All right, you can actually use dataset. You can use the app names in there as well. You can manipulate the path. You've got a path right now, but you need to bring in something. You can put something on front of your path with app prepend path. You can put something at the end of your path with append path, and basically it will apply only to the current process. All right. This allows you to bring in app folders on a temporary basis, which is actually extremely useful. App prepend path is going to put the work into the first app folder. It's going to put it in front. Append path is now going to, for FF work, is going to be put at the end. All right. Now, if I want to map something, if I don't have an app name for something, how do I get that? App map. App map allows me to give a name, assign a name, so that I can use it with the app technology. And I just basically use app map and some name, and then I'm pointing at some sort of file, and it's either another app, which I can do, or it could be another file. All right, and I can give it an absolute file. Very useful. Show path. App show path shows me what my path looks like right now. All right. We added share and FF temp before we appended them, and now you can see if I do a show path, it's going to show up right there, and that's what we're looking for. App list. If I do an app list, all right, it's going to list all the real and mapped application folders. Right, it's like an app show path, right? If I do an app list hold, it's actually going to put that into a file, and that file is going to be called FOCAPPL. I can then table that file and actually do anything I want with it, right? Which is extremely useful. And this is what I've done here is I've just tabled FOCAPPL, print star, and it's given me the contents because I just did this app list hold. FOCAPPL is another one of these focus metadata interfaces, which is really, really useful. App query, app name hold will again give me the list of all the contents of a specific app name. So all the files that are in a specific app, I can get the list of that app query, the application name, and hold, and it's going to put it into something called FOCAPPQ. And if I table FOCAPPQ, yep, I can print star, and that's what I'm going to get. All right, let's talk a little bit about troubleshooting. Let's talk about four things. One, leave a trail using SQL traces and X retrieval, amper echo and amper stack, and the magic of whence. All right. Leave a trail. Okay, this is the concept of Hansel and Gretel. When you're working on stuff in code and you don't leave a trail where you are. All right, where you've made changes, and you can use something like the little amper, the eyeballs, the two at signs, at signs. It makes your changes easy to find. All right, and much easier to remove. So if you're working with something and you're doing debugging, leave a trail. Put something in. The dash star amper at sign basically is going to be it's a comment, right? It's a comment inside of Dialog Manager. Dash star is always a comment, but dash star amper, I can look for that. I can look for the at sign, and very easily find that. And that's the idea behind leaving a path, is to making sure it's easy to find. Tracing. This is something that we use constantly, or not constantly, but we use. And it's always good to have a little trace.fex file laying around that you can do a dash include on, and that's all you have to do. And the kinds of things you're going to put in dash trace will be trace off, trace on, specifying the traces that you want to use and where it's going to go, the trace user. All right. This could be FS trace, it could be client. Trace off equals all basically is going to turn off all the traces that currently exist because there's a ton of them. And in this particular case, I'm only looking for my SQL aggregation and the SQL that I generate when I'm working with an SQL interface. This is a very common, very, very common thing because I really want to know what happened to that focus request that I sent in. I sent it in and you turned it into some kind of an SQL statement, and I'm not sure that's really what I wanted to get. This is the way you can see it. You can actually see it generated. Now, not only can you do that, you can turn off X retrieval so that when you do that, when you send that trace, that SQL in, you can actually set it so that I don't actually communicate with the database. I'll go all the way up to the point of actually sending the request to the database, and then I'll stop. I won't actually do the IO. So I'll do all the parsing. I'll create the request so that I can show you the commands that I'm going to send in. All right. When I do X retrieval on, I'm actually going to run this. All right. This thing. This request got turned into this SQL, and I'm actually doing the data. You can see it here. I've got a certain number of records actually returned. Now, if you don't want to do the IO, you don't need to do the IO, especially if you're just checking the data, the actual SQL that you're generating. Turn off X retrieval. You'll see that the retrieval is killed. No IO is actually done, and this comes back a whole lot faster with large databases than X retrieval on does. And that ultimately is the point. All right, the point is about finding out whether the trace, whether it's correct in what it's doing. Now, I can see what's going on when I'm running Focus using \echo, and this traces all of my WebFocus and Focus commands. I've got 4 different things I can do with this: on, all, off, and none. Default is off. And I've got a stack command, which basically tells me whether I'm going to stack stuff or not. All right. Bulk stack basically is the command execution stack. All right. Table, modify, match, graph, all these commands go on the stack. Right. And I want to see the stack because that's what's being built, especially when you're using a GUI tool. You're actually building a stack. I will probably want to see that. My default is on, with products on stack, so they actually can see it, but I can turn it off. My default for echo is typically turned off because that's just a lot of extra coverage. I can see dialog manager and stack with all. I can see just the stack execution with on. All my dialog manager has been already taken care of, but I don't see that. And I can prevent it from running entirely. I can block echo by setting it to none. Right? None is a very interesting command. It was put in primarily for WebFocus because people found out that they could actually turn echo on and see what somebody else was doing fairly easily. And because it was laying around. Okay, don't want to do that. You can block it and prevent people that know about it but shouldn't have authority from using it with none. All right, you can use them together. This enables troubleshooting of dialog manager, execution flow, and variable resolution. And especially with X retrieval, you can do this without heavy report execution, which can be a real problem. The traces typically are available in HTML source. So wherever your output, your trace is coming in, wherever you can bring it. If you're focused, you can stick it in. You can bring it to the screen. You can even put it in. You can offline it into a file. You can offline it into a file on the WebFocus side as well. All right. I've got echo on and stack off, in which case I'm going to see my WebFocus commands and all of my resolve values, but it's not going to show me any of my dialog manager commands, and it is not going to execute the stack. Right. If I set this to all with stack off, I'm going to now see all of my resolve values, all of the dialog manager commands, and it's going to show me the navigation and process flow. And again, it's not going to execute the stack. Whence? Where is my FOCUS? Where is this FOCUS? I don't know. Whence? Give them the FOCUS name and FOCUS. It will tell us where that is. Where's that in your path? Where is that? All right. This is very useful, especially if you're running something and you're getting something completely different. I'm running FOCUS ABC, and it's not a table. ABC should be table file car. It's not. It's table file employee. What's going on? Well, your path may be messed up, or you may not have the path you think you have. You can look for FOCUS master files, access files. You can actually look for anything that we can deal with as a DD name, and you can look for them this way. Very, very useful. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring back the absolute path of what you're looking for. All right. All right. Let's see. Anything else? Nothing. No. Okay. All right. That pretty much wraps up. I'm going to spend a little time talking about some mainframe kinds of systemy issues. Uh, so if you're not into mainframes, you're certainly welcome to disappear if you want. The idea that behind this is this next thing is I'm going to cover cover. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna cover. I know I'm gonna cover it. Where did I put it? There we go. I want to take a look at what focus and focus commands look like on the Z platform. All right, which is our largest platform for focus. The IBM Z platform is where focus lives and lives very well. So I want to spend some time talking about what focus looks like on a platform, especially for people who don't have any idea what focus is. We have a lot of people like me, my age, who retired a long time ago and are no longer there. And there are a lot of new people coming up. So it's important for them to be able to see and get used to what the focus world actually looks like. That's what I'm going to spend time doing now. All right, let's go up here. Come on, not this one, this one. All right, here we go. Let's take a look at the files on Z and see what we've got. This is kind of like a high level view of what Focus and WebFocus files are from the point of view of the system. Uh, in the Focus world and the WebFocus world, the files are pretty much the same, and it's important to have an understanding of what they are. Now, Focus has been delivered, as you may not be aware. Focus is currently available from the 708R release, which was delivered about 24 years ago, to the 9.2.3 release, which was delivered 2 weeks ago or a week ago, right? Now, there's some differences, but for the most part, there's an enormous amount of common. There are three basic versions. The 708R through 7613 was a PDS version only. 707, 703, and 7706 was delivered as a PDS version. It's a partition data set, along with some aliases, and we'll talk about why we did that. Focus 7709 and up is our 64-bit version of Focus, which is one of the few products that's full 64-bit now on the mainframe. It is a PDS. It's delivered as PDSE. It's an extended PDS, which means it's a lot easier to manage, along with some aliases. So let's take a look what that means. 708R, 7613 included these basic data sets. All right. If you looked at Focus, this is what you'd see. The data sets would have these names. There would also be a number of data sets that were specific to the interfaces that we give you. All right. And they would also be delimited. In 7703 and above, we have changed the way that we work. We now deliver physical files that are different. As a matter of fact, the physical files that we deliver for 7703 all the way up to 9.2 are the same. We have a whole lot of f.home files, 8 of them, and we have 6 conf files that are delivered. That's really all that's there. Now, what happened to all of those other files? There are 26 logical aliases that we use to mimic the older structures so that people working with older structures don't have to worry about, oh, all of that JCL I had running or set up, and all the custom user code and the applications that I set up using those old names, Well, you don't have to worry about them because the aliases at the system level, which we give you, will allow you to run your older code. And that was actually one of the most important things that we needed to do. We needed to maintain JCL compatibility with existing product installations. This is something that IBM does. This is something that we continue to do. All right. It also simplifies the installation. A whole lot fewer files are actually being moved. Aliases, creating the alias is relatively simple. This also allowed us to align Focus and WebFocus products, okay? Common engines with common features. That actually means that Focus ends up getting more features automatically from WebFocus. Some of the functionality that's available in Focus is now available on the WebFocus side, and specifically the modify CRT form and that whole area. The interactive stuff is now available over there. This also existed as part of our full upgrade to a full 64-bit product. LE, language environment. IBM has a language environment which enforces very strict coding conventions, and it's a beautiful thing because it allows it it creates compatibility issues. It gets rid of problems that we used to have when we used to have code that was built in Fortran and built in C, built in COBOL, built in PL1. It used to be an assembler. It used to be a nightmare. It's a huge problem still, but it's no longer the nightmare because the LE, the language environment, basically has a set of rules now that enforce compliance that we have to comply with, so that anytime anybody uses the code in any of these other languages, the codes can intermix without difficulty. That's a big thing. We've also moved into the PDSE, the extended PDS data sets, for a very simple reason. It's a lot easier to manage. Okay, partition data sets are still out there. IBM has been trying to push people into PDSEs for a long time. We're now basically doing the same thing. It's just easier to manage. You don't have to worry about compressing. You don't have to. It's a lot of issues that you don't have to worry about anymore with respect to the management of the file, and that consequently we did that. Now, when you put Focus on the system, what does it look like? Well, let's take a look at the files. Let's take a look at the interface and the adapter files. There are load files. These are the runnable code files. All of this is going to be in f.home.load. All right, whether it's an interface or it's an or part of the core product, this is now going to live in the load file. Right, it's very simple. Then there's also data files associated with most of the interfaces. All right, and these are support. These are generally there for support, and this could be linkage stuff that we would provide. It might be additional code that's required to link or to bind an adapter. There may be folk execs in there to provide language to development of, for instance, master files. We used to actually gen these interfaces on site, and that would be part of the installation process, and it was complicated. That's because we didn't really know always what we were going to run into. We no longer do these gens on site anymore. We now provide the finished product so that you don't have to worry about doing gens on site. The FOCLive.load is all of the runnable Focus code, and it's stored in f.home.load. FuseLive.load and FuseLive.data are originally for the subroutines. They're not really used anymore. We will put samples of runnable code over there. We will put help files for the user-written subroutines over there. All of the user-written subroutines, which were kept separate, are now included as part of FOCLive.load. User can put stuff in here if he wants to. Errors.data. Errors.data and ErrorNLS, which is our international version, is the storage place for all of the Focus error messages. Right. And as such, you can't start the product without having a DDD pointing at this. The Focus error messages have to be there. They can be changed and they can be translated. You might have your site, if you're in France or in Germany, may have a whole set of files that begin with the language name FRE or GER that indicate that these are translated files for Focus, and they're translated. They're the same error messages. We store severity for the error messages in as part of the message, as part of the error message itself. And these can be changed. All right. So you actually have some flexibility here. There's things that are, we have 3 levels: an info, warning, and error. And typically with error, we stop. Typically with warning, we don't. Info, we don't. If you want to change something, you actually can go in and adjust the specific error message and change the level of severity so that your site has different usage. The master files are critical. Focus works with metadata describing other data, and that metadata is common, right, across all other data tools. You can create these by hand. You can use an auto tool. You can use create synonym. Basically, whatever you create is going to be allocated to DD name master, and it's going to be allocated to DD name master, giving it access. These tools, once you can have multiple libraries concatenated underneath DD name. We will use the first one that we find, so be a little bit careful. Master files contain focus DBA, really critical stuff. This gives you control in the file down to the field value level, right? And that's actually pretty important. Now, the master file can also contain pretty much everything but the kitchen sink. Now, what do I mean? It has metadata about fields, segments, joins, clusters, virtual fields, defines and computes, filters, where and where total, sort objects, bys and acrosses, style objects, focus style, join, cross-reference segments. What else do we have? Pretty much all of these things can be stored in a master file, which in the WebFOCUS world is great because it means that you can access it from the front-end tool through the object inspector, which means that you can see it and pick it very easily, which makes life much easier for you guys. Part of the great strength. We also have access.data, which is basically going to provide access files. These are typically files that contain information about the data files that we're working with. They're associated primarily with master files, part of the synonym. And they will contain connection strings. They might contain information about external indexes and MDI indexes for focus files. If there is field renaming for long field names going on, it could be stored here. It's going to be required for all data interfaces except Focus and XFocus and flat files. Focus and XFocus can use them, not necessary. You can create them manually with an auto tool or using create synonym. FOCUSexecs are the guts of Focus. This is what we do. All right. This is what is actually being generated when you're sitting on the front end of Designer. You're building a FOCUSexec that's going to be passed to the back end and run. All right. All right. And you're building it with a GUI front end. The FOCUSexecs contain the Focus code that's going to be processed, all right, by the Focus engine. And go, come on, don't get lost. All right, it's an interpreted language. It's editable in ISPF on the mainframe, or in Focus. You can use TED or iEdit if you have that installed. It's allocated to DD name FOCUSexec. And you can have multiples underneath that DD name. Be careful. We will use the first one we find. All right. So it's important to understand what the sequence is of your concatenation there. Okay. Focus code includes system level operations like allocation, concatenation, copy, deletion, all kinds of good things. In other words, Focus can talk to the operating system. The operating system can talk to Focus. Right. So you have the ability. You don't necessarily have to drop out of Focus in order to do something at an operating system level. You can do it directly from within. The major language areas inside of Focus include table, join, match, which are primarily reporting, graph, which is charting, dialog manager, which is our proc language, modify and maintain, which is transaction processing. We have also a windowing functionality inside of Focus. Focus window files are stored as TRF. or FMU.data files that you'll see out on the system if you've got them. FMU files, the TRF files are pure alpha. They're used for transfer. They can be compiled into an FMU file for faster loading and running. And basically the window command, this focus window command is available as a stackable command or as an immediate dialog manager executable command. There are a standard number of windows that are available to you when you're building with Focus Windows. Remember, this goes back to, if you remember Windows 3 and the SDK, this is what this was really all about. That goes way back. The last thing I want to talk about are the conf files. Conf files are our configuration files. They exist in the Focus products in 7703 and above. Everything is conf dot, and you'll find them there. There's a .data file, which includes a lot of really important stuff. Things like alias. Alias is a JCL that we create on your site to recreate your Focus aliases. So if you lose one, you can get it back real easy. Focus and Focus C are JCL and C lists created with your specific system in mind so that you can immediately run Focus either as a batch job, JCL, or as a C list, right? There's a generic job card that we build for your system. DB2 bind procedures and files are stored in here. There's also the iSetup JCL that was used to install the product. When you install Focus, we write JCL on the fly to install the product. That's stored here in conf.data. So if you need to find it, conf.dsn, del list basically are lists of the files that we have put on your system so that you can either in the conf directory or in the regular directory, so that if you need to remove them, you can do that very easily. There's a list of files here. You can do whatever you need. You want to copy them? Here. Here's a list automatically. You don't have to go crazy. Conf.cfg includes a number of things. One really important one is the $rel DDS. This contains an internal concatenation that we use for the errors file. And consequently, if you move stuff around, if you move from one system to another, you need to make sure that this $rel DDS is correct. You need to go in and edit it and make sure that it's pointing at the correct, at DSNs that are current to your system. All right. There's a font user utility here, which is also really useful because it allows you to add fonts on the Z, and that includes TrueType fonts. Last, but not least, conf.prf contains the etta.sprof.prf file, which is the typical WebFOCUS system profile, which Focus also uses. All right, and that's it. All right, let's see. That's enough for today. Are there any questions out there? Let's see if there's any. We got some questions. In what version is this supported? Yes. All of that stuff works in old versions. The seminar this is going to be sent out next week. All right. And we'll send you I hope we're sending copies of the presentation along with that. The actual MP4 that we're creating will also be kept, and I will turn that off shortly. Where would I find the trace files where would you find the trace files? Depends on where you send them. Typically trace files will go into if you're working with it without allocating it to a specific place, it's probably going to show up in your source file. All right, so take a look at source. Is there a way to find out the ID under which effects is running? I'm using a file to write to a directory on a remote server, but I'm getting an insufficient authority. I don't need what ID to grant. Okay, that's a good question, and I will have to get back to you on that, Alan. I will make note of that, and I will shoot an answer out to you in the beginning of the week. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Next month we'll be back, and you'll be getting in a week or so. You'll be starting to hear about what we're going to do next month. So please keep those cards and letters coming, and we'll talk to you very soon. One chat. Okay. Do you have an example of sort fields in the dot mass and doing the Tom. Okay, yes, I can. I'll put a sample of putting sort fields in the master files, sort object. I know that's probably not well documented, but it's really useful. All right, so I will be very happy to send that along to you, Tom. All right, gentlemen, thank you for coming.